Oh, sorry, you're recording. So I didn't realise you pressed record.
Already recording. Yeah.
Oh, well, how good's the old no editing rugby league coach podcast? That's going to be the most awkward start to our podcast in history. Welcome back, episode 9 of Rugby League Coach podcast. Lee, we're excited. We had a guest last week, and hopefully we're going to get some more this week.
Mate, Phil Caplan, the journalist from England, from the UK, is just joining us right now. I can see it. Phil, can you hear us? Hey, mate.
I can hear you loud and clear. And unfortunately, you can see me as well. All good.
Good. Mate, this is Taylor. Taylor's actually one of my old players and students from the St. Greg's days, and he actually went on to have a great career. He played some under 20s and then at St. George, and then went up and played for the Redcliffe Dolphins. So Taylor, meet Phil, my old mate Phil.
G'day, Phil. How are you, mate?
25 years.
Good to see you.
Good to see you too. I hope you're not sweltering too much in that English heat that you're getting at the moment. I'm very worried for you all getting the 30-degree heat.
Well, it hit 40 on Tuesday. It's officially classed as mafting here at the moment.
Oh, perfect. Beach weather, mate. Beach weather.
Knowing Phil as I do, he'll be really, really happy that the Tories are at front and centre of everything news-wise now. He'll be upset that Boris is no longer in the chair, but he'll be really happy that there's a Tory leadership race now, and he'll be really happy with all the candidates and whatnot.
Oh well,
I don't want to get you taken off air. To be honest, I'm not even going to respond to
that. Well, Phil, it's lovely.
Sorry, you go, Taylor.
So I was just saying, Phil, it's lovely to have you join us, mate. If you watched last week's episode, I spoke with Lee and Tim. We had a discussion around the trials, schoolboy level, all sorts of trialing for all rugby league sides, and how hard it can be. And there's sometimes, I guess, a little bit of the learnt laziness that can be involved in those trials and the selections that we see, all across that can shape players' careers. Lee made an interesting comment. He said that it's not only shaped by people that are selectors, it can sometimes be shaped by player managers getting involved. When I heard that, obviously Lee's been involved in schoolboy rugby league and trials and obviously the other side of the fence for a long time. And I was immediately intrigued, and I thought, what a better way to start this podcast than to ask Lee to, elaborate, share with us what you meant when you were talking about managers having an influence on selections throughout trials.
So when a player becomes an Australian schoolboy international, and the same, I assume, Phil, in England, if they get an England academy selection, if there's any agents involved in that mix, they're happy because their price goes. So there's all sorts of contracts where it'll say, where a club will go, I don't know, you get $10,000 or £10,000, and then they think to themselves, well, that player might not make Aussie schoolboys or might not make England academy, so we'll put an extra 5k in if they make that, just so it makes beefs the contract up. Well, it's in the manager's interest to get that extra 5k for their client and also for the player, obviously. The player is obviously keen, but the other side of the politics is that they necessarily don't want that because they don't want to spend the money. So I don't know what it's like in England, those things. The sergeant's here. Put your camera on, Sergeant. Here he is.
Just having some eat.
Yeah, no, you're all right. Just keep it on mute. Sergeant, this is Phil, my mate from England, journalist from England. This is Tim Cheeseman. We call him Sergeant Slaughter.
How you going, mate?
Is that just on his eating ability?
He's just ate one of his players that he coaches. That's what he's eating. What's that scene like in England, Phil, with the agents and whatnot and kids?
I think we've got a different problem over here, which is something that we wrote about a month or so ago, that participation levels are so low at the moment overall, particularly in the community game, that actually just getting people to play is more of a problem than finding the elite players. I think we've got an issue with the scholarship system over here as well, that because there are less young players playing the game to a quality, they're being hoovered up by the main Super League clubs. They're being put on a pathway that ultimately not all of them will be successful on. And the issue at that is the drop off at 17 or 18. They don't go back to the community game or even drop down the ladder. So I think we've got different issues over here. You've got choice. We haven't. So I think the other problem we have as well is in scholarship and academy systems, we're not paying our most gifted athletes enough. They can earn more on an engineering apprenticeship than they can to be an elite professional in rugby league, which means that we are not getting the choice of players and we're not retaining them for long enough. So the issue with that is that clearly an NRL club can come in and pick off the best players that are being produced over here, or kids who have got talent in sport will choose a sport other than rugby league if they want to be a professional. And we haven't quite got that balance right at the moment, but it's down to we're not feeding enough raw ingredients in at the bottom. Now that's for a number of reasons. It's partly down to clearly we had 2 years of players not playing any form of sport here. And when it's not your first choice sport in the first place, it's too easy to probably give up on rugby league. It's a really tough game to play, particularly if you're going to make a career out of it. So we've got a whole review of the game going on at the moment, which happens about every 15 minutes. And we've got a new company called IMG who bought into rugby league for the next 12 years. And they're doing yet another root and branch survey. And I'm hoping that it isn't just looking at the structure of the professional game, whether that be men's, women's, wheelchair, international, but also at the participation end in the community game, because that's where a lot of the issues lie. You can have the best structure in the world, but if you haven't got enough people coming into it, it's not self-sustaining.
Going back to agents and money, you mentioned money, Phil, and Taylor, you'll be aware of this because I guess you didn't earn a great deal when you were playing under 20s or SG ball. I find a lot of agents, there's plenty of cowboys out there and cowgirls, sharks, and they fill parents' heads with, we'll get you here, we'll get you there, you'll get this, you'll get that. The reality is we are in a salary cap sport on both sides of the world. There's 2 full-time professional competitions in this world. I think Papua New Guinea have something resembling one, but obviously it's not a money spinner and known on the world stage. But ultimately, there's 2 full-time televised competitions in this world, and there's a salary cap in the sport on both sides. So that means there's actually a limit on what you can and can't earn. So, but on the flip side, since the Super League war in the early 90s, when a few people made some great money off players, when clubs in Australia and England were just throwing money left, right, and centre at anybody who had 2 legs, 2 arms, and maybe a head to go with it. Agents came on the scene, and then since then, it's been seen as an attractive thing to be a rugby league agent. But the actual maths of it suggests that there's not that much money in the game because it's salary capped, and there's something like 200 to 300 registered agents in the sport. And I think that's worldwide as well, maybe even more. So there's not that much. If you really want to drill in and you want to work out the salary cap of each squad, so I keep forgetting what the figure is in Australia. It seems to change quite regularly, and I can't remember what it is in England. Phil, you might be able to enlighten us. But once you times that by 12 in Super League or 16 in Australia and divide it by every agent that's running around, if it was an egalitarian system, none of them would have that much money. What's happened is there's sort of like 5, 10, 15 at the top who've hoovered up most of the best talent in the first 20 years or so of all this, and then most of the other agents are part-time, and they go out, don't they, and try and attract families and get them on board and promise them the earth and deliver them not as much, maybe a table and chairs from the top of the earth, but it's also got to the point, hasn't it, Tim, where a player who's going to go anywhere sort of feel like they need an agent over it.
Yeah, that's right. I've never had much to do with agents at all. So, but having something over here would be a lot better.
Because every kid sort of feels now that they're not going to make anywhere in the game. They're not going to get anywhere in the game unless they've got an agent. It's like the most common thing, Taylor, I get.
It is.
Lee, how can I get an agent? It's the most common question.
So I don't know. I told you this story last week, Lee, and I can't remember if we were recording the podcast or we were off the podcast. I had a discussion about what happened with myself when it came time sort of for me, and I had player agents sniffing around me. Before I'd played SG Ball at the Dragons, I'd just been selected in the New South Wales Triple C squad to play at the Australian schoolboy trials.
Yeah.
And in the space of about maybe a fortnight, maybe, double that, Dad's just kept coming home from work every day saying, mate, I've been contacted by this player agent. I've been contacted by this player agent. And then all of a sudden, as soon as I made the schoolboy side, just agent after agent after agent called, and they're all promising all this stuff to Dad. Oh, we can get him through these doors and all that sort of stuff. And the reason why I think I spoke about it last weekend, because Clinton Shukovsky and Steve Gillis, Chimesy, actually were one of the people that contacted Dad. And they were the only bloke that said to my old man, look, has he got a contract on offer at the moment? And Dad said, yeah, he's got a three-year deal on the table with the Dragons. And he said, well, stop speaking to player agents. You don't even need me. Let me have a look. He had a little look at the deal and said, mate, you could shop for as long as you want and you still wouldn't get much more. He's a front rower, he's young. He hasn't played any games of 20s yet. He's still coming through. He said he's going to get the best.
That big.
He's got an ass that big, he's going to get the best opportunity anyway. So just do that. And if something happens in a couple of years, then we'll talk then. But you don't have many player agents trying to do that. And I think it's because Steve Gillis is one of the big ones where he's like, well, he's just a young fella. See how he goes first. But these player agents, not many of them out of all of them that called my dad really had my best interest at heart. They weren't thinking of me. And the thing that stuck out with Steve Gillis is he did. He said, mate, you don't need me. You've got something there. Sign it, work hard. Let's just see what happens.
And you ended up signing with that company, didn't you?
I did. Yeah, I did. I ended up signing with them later on and looking when I was looking for stuff elsewhere. And yeah, in the end, I did end up signing for them purely because, he passed the pub test. He was the best bloke. He seemed to have my best interest at heart. But the stories you're telling me there is just, it's they're not all very trustworthy, the agents. And if they're having influences on selection processes and that, it needs to be really pulled up.
What's the scene like in England, Philip, with agents?
We don't. Not to the same degree, because clearly we're not as major a sport. There isn't enough money to be made out of it, and I think a lot of the rugby league player agents also have a sportsman in other sports, and that's probably how they make their money. Yestin Harris, for example, who came out of playing and went into being a player agent, I think he's got very few rugby league players now that he looks after. It's mainly footballers who are playing in Italy. I mean, it might be a radical suggestion, but I've always thought that agents actually should primarily earn their money on the ancillary deals rather than the contracts. I don't know how you would regulate it, but clearly talent is talent, and it's the player that's got it and not the agent. So if there could be a cap on the percentage an agent could earn from a playing contract, but the bulk of their money could be made up from advertising revenue, appearance revenue, sponsorship revenue, the additional money that they're bringing to the player, I could see that working. Now, how a governing body would regulate that, I don't know, but I just put some of the interest back into the player's pocket rather than the agent's pocket. And talent alone is the preserve of the player and not the agent.
Phil's really good with the worldwide rugby league team, Taylor, right? So I know I've had Kirk questions this week. So do you remember Kirk who we brought up last week? Taylor, yes. He's busy again. And I'll go to his first point second. He asks, outside of Panthers, who can you see as premiership winners?
Are you asking me or Phil?
Whoever wants to answer it first.
This is going to sound very left field, but I think with a few key additions into their squad, if Luke Keary comes back, I can see the Roosters going on a good end-of-season run in the semi-finals. They just got such a good side. I think the addition of Matt Lodge was huge for them. They needed something big up through the middle. They certainly have premiership talent. They've had players that have done it before. And if they get Keary back, they get Sam Walker firing, Joey Manu, who's one of the best players in the world at the moment. I think they certainly have the ability to, go close. I actually had a sneaky look at the markets last week to have a punt on the Roosters to make the grand final. So there you go. That's how serious I am. I think the Roosters can do it.
Timothy, who do you think?
I think one of the Queensland teams, either the Broncos or the Cowboys, as an outsider. Yeah.
Put your camera on. Were you worried because you're eating?
Yeah, no, it's just
okay, fine. I did this podcast the other week, and I'd just woken up. Literally, I've just woken up. I had a nose in the afternoon, so don't worry about it. All right, one of the Broncos or Cowboys.
Yeah. Well, just the way they've played that first half, they have absolutely annihilated Para. in the first half.
We're recording now while Broncos and Para are playing, and Para's season seems to be going into disarray. Who do you think, Phil?
I've got a soft spot for the Broncos, so I'll go with them as making the final and losing to Penrith.
I think the Gold Coast Crushers will win all that. No, I tipped Para before the year started in the first couple of rounds.
Yep.
And the funny thing is, it's such a strange competition. I'll check the ladder in a minute, but you don't need to be winning games now.
No.
You literally don't need to be winning games now. And I think if Brad Arthur's been guilty of anything, it's that he's gone so hard so early with the team that they might have run out of juice and not timed the run right. And I remember Crutcher Cleal talking to me when I was at Manly over a decade ago, and even back then they were talking about momentum and timing going into the finals. And that is more important than ever. And I've just looked at the ladder. Parramatta, as we talk right now, are currently in 6th. By the end of the weekend, they might not be. They might be 7th or whatever. But they're only 4 points, as we sit right now, off second place. So it actually probably doesn't matter that much. No. Hold on now. You probably need to get going around about middle of August. And I do remember last year, South Sydney, everyone was saying they can't defend, they're leaking too many points, blah blah blah. Wayne Bennett, the old master coach, he just tightened the bolts and turned the screws about maybe 6 weeks out from the grand final, 8 weeks out, and they played in a very defensive grand final and only lost by a try. So,
yes,
do you think Brad Arthur can do that?
I think the last couple of seasons, Para ran out of juice a little bit towards the end, right? Last year, they ran out of juice a bit earlier and then got back in the running for the semis. Well, I think this is him throwing the dice this year with the whole timing thing and whatnot. Do I think now, am I starting to get a bit worried about my decision to back Para? Yes, I am. If you're asking me to tip anyone right now, I think you've got to say Penrith. It does seem to cut above. I mean, even their reserves are beating teams.
Quality outfit throughout their whole squad, and that just goes to show the attitude they have over there at the foot of the mountains is very impressive and steel-like almost in the way that they approach their football all the way club through.
Phil, you do podcasts and that as well. Me and Taylor have this strange thing, like he hosts it, but like sometimes I just chime in and say, no, it's weird, isn't it, Taylor? Like I don't need to.
Mate. That's you're a bit of a dominant character, Lee. You like to try and put your fingers in all the pies and all the things, and that's okay. I roll with the flow. I'm fine with that.
I don't think that one of my students should be talking like that to his old teacher.
But listen, if you start putting it in your resume that you're the host, I'll have to reel you back in. All right, I'll reel you back in.
But I'm going to bring in the next topic now, Taylor, because it's really good that Phil's here for this. Because Kirk, who we've never met, he just keeps sending in questions. Can't think of anything pressing other than the eligibility debate. And I reckon we could fill 6 podcasts for this. I can see both sides. Expanding means the best versus the best. But the idea of picking and choosing different countries doesn't sit well with me personally. I'm English, and if English don't pick me, I'm not then going to play for Scotland.
Right.
So, this is the week of Victor Radley, isn't it? Deciding he's playing for England. Taylor, I'll hand over to you and allow you to anchor this conversation.
Okay. Now, the conversation here is that Victor Radley, born in Australia, has a father of English heritage, was obviously born in England, now says he has this burning passion. He's willing to give up a state of origin jersey in the future to play for England now. Phil, as a Pommie, still in Pommie land, not a half convert like Lee, how does it sit with you having someone like Victor Radley being sort of an expat, taking the position of a Pommie in that side?
Well, first of all, Lee is a plastic pom. He has been for quite a while. I don't think this is a difficult issue. I think, make it difficult if you want to, but you're either eligible or you're not eligible. And I think that in Victor Radley's case, he's made himself available. The difference in this case is you're talking about 2 tier 1 nations, and that very rarely happens. You don't need to give up eligibility to Origin if you're playing for a Tier 2 nation, but he has decided to withdraw from Origin to play for England. First of all, to me, that smacks of commitment. Now, you'll probably be able to tell me that, he might be a fifth choice player in Origin and he's not giving up much. But from what we've seen of Victor Radley over here, of course you'd welcome him into your team. He is on a par with the best that we've got. And I think international sport is the catalyst to drive rugby league to areas it hasn't been to yet and should have done over the last 130 years. Now, if you were talking earlier about who may win the NRL, clearly you're choosing from 7 or 8 teams. At the moment in Super League, we've probably got 2 that can win it, if we're being perfectly honest. We haven't got that equitability of competition. All your teams spend the salary cap, all our teams don't. What do we want out of international rugby league? I was at World Cup breakfast yesterday. They're going around all the host nations gathering support. They happened to be in Leeds yesterday. Fantastic event, 300 people there. A lot of businesses who haven't been connected with rugby league before. Their first hook to hang on for both their commercial interests and rewarding their staff is to look at taking them into international games. You wouldn't do that in the club game. If you can say to them, any one of 7 nations have got a chance of making the semi-finals or perhaps even contesting the final if they get it right on any given day, and that's because we've got an even flow of talent, then absolutely I'm all for it. Victor Radley would be welcomed into the England squad because he adds to it. I don't have an issue with what the Jason Taumalolo's did to make Tonga a Tier 2 nation that looks to be on the verge of Tier 1. If anything, I would prefer Australia not to name squads where they've got players of other internationals in it. And England are just as guilty. England have named their recent squad with Ireland internationals in it. If we're serious about what we want to do with international rugby league, England don't need to pick players who are eligible for other nations. They've got enough strength in depth in those positions. Let's spread the talent. Let's make sure that it's not a foregone conclusion that it's going to be an Australia-New Zealand final, and welcome them. They're either eligible or they're not.
Absolutely. And Phil, it's such a good point that you raise about making this the strongest sort of possible competition it can be. I absolutely agree. But the first thing you said was, if he is eligible, it should be a non-conversation. Now, the big conversation is the eligibility rules in itself. Tim, I'm going to throw to you now. What are your thoughts on the eligibility rules at the moment? Do you think they work? And do you think that it's a system that needs overhauling?
I think the system needs overhauling. For me, playing for Queensland or New South Wales, that's to pick the Australian team. I love that all of the Polynesian countries and everything like that are coming in and they're producing some absolutely wonderful talent. But I believe that we should have like an independent round where we have state of origin and we have the Pacific nations where these guys can play for their country, for their nation, and getting something similar to state of origin in with their own countries. And I think that would most likely make the international game a lot stronger. Like these guys are absolutely carving up the NRL, and you've got so many players now that have either 2 or 3 fall under 2 or 3 different categories, and they're just, to me, it seems like they're money grabbing. Where I think it would be the Australian team was always picked from the best of Queensland, the best of New South Wales, and like all 3, like the Australian coach, the New South Wales coach, and the Queensland coach, they sit down and they pick the Australian team.
I think you've got to go back one step from everything that you've just said and say, what does the game want out of international rugby league?
Yeah.
Because the 2 things that consistently are debated over here is that it's over 50 years now since England or Great Britain really challenged in winning something. So state of origin has filled that gap, and state of origin now is such a money spinner. What do we need to do with the international game to put it back to the pinnacle? And it's not something that England on their own can do, or France on their own can do, or even Australia on their own can do. What does the game want out of international rugby league? And there's absolutely no reason why, if you put the internationals at the top of the pile and you let people play for who they are eligible to play for, that you cannot have state of origin under that. It's the other way around at the moment. Anybody can play origin and you can pick the Australian team from those who are eligible from origin at the moment. And that's partly the fault of over here because we haven't been competitive enough. Origin now supersedes the international game. But if we're serious, truly serious about spreading the word and getting the equality of talent across the international teams, then we all have to decide what this international calendar looks like and make sure that if you are eligible to play for Ireland, Samoa, whoever it might be, you know what the next 4 years of internationals are leading to the next World Cup, and you can make that decision as to who you want to play for.
Yeah, certainly a holistic approach to the whole calendar and the set out would make a lot more sense and provide players with that knowledge before they make their picks. But Lee, I've just listened to Tim say that he'd like those players sort of that can represent Samoa, Tonga, England to make their choices, sort of to pick and stick and have the opportunities for them to represent their countries. Now, you've been involved for a long time in coaching blokes, in particular in the school system for a long time as well. You've seen a lot of kids that may be able to born in Samoa or, have families that are from Samoa, but they're here. They grew up here, they were born here, and they feel a strong sense of allegiance to this state, to this country, to whether it's New South Wales or Queensland, and also what represents them. So what do you have to say on the topic, I guess, in response to Tim being against it?
Sometimes when I listen to the media over here in Australia, I sometimes think I'm listening to dinosaurs. And I also hate the fact that so many of them seem to just think the world revolves around origin. Now, last time I crossed from New South Wales into Queensland or Queensland into New South Wales, I wasn't asked for a passport. Because you don't need a Queensland passport, you don't need a New South Wales passport. It's all part of a country called Australia. When you go from one country to another, you need a passport. So it's a different kettle of fish. So at the state level, in terms of our government and whatnot, it's a different kettle of fish than federal. It's a different kettle of fish in the sense that state of origin, even by its very title, state of origin. Now, when you look and you dig into origin, it's about where you played your first club football at age 13. Now, if you were born in Timbuktu, but played your first club football at St. Christopher's, where you and my friend Steve, God rest his soul, started out, he qualifies for state of origin. Doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
What are those rules? So my argument is the conversation the game needs to deal with it. It's not the same conversation. Victor Radley can probably get a British or I was going to say an EU passport. I don't know if he can get one of them now. But, he can probably get a British passport because of his dad. Well, guess what? That means he can live in England as a British citizen.
Yeah.
And be entitled to everything that myself or Phil might be entitled to.
Yeah, so,
being a British citizen. So my point is the whole conversation is wrong. So anybody, and Tim's right in the sense that Queensland and New South Wales used to play, and that was a selection for Australia. I think the game's moved too slowly in terms of where the world is at. People are now very rarely from one tribe, like they're from one, lineage of families. We've all got a bit of something else in us. I qualify for Poland and Ireland, and I've lived in Australia for most of my adult life. I've got an Australian passport and a British one. And I'm hardly, it's quite clear I feel English and I love being English, but I could play rugby league or coach rugby for Poland, for Ireland, or whatnot. It's just the way the world is, Taylor. It's the way the world is. And if we're going to grow the game beyond what it is right now, we need to get the World Cup as big as possible. We need to get the international game as big as possible. And what also gets my goal is that a few weeks ago, we had this conversation about Brian Tuttle, Stephen Crichton, Jerome Luai. And at the same time, nobody seems to mind the fact that Tonga and Samoa have gone largely with heritage players to near the top of the Rugby League international rankings. And Tonga beat Australia a couple of years ago with an awful lot of heritage players. Heritage it's just the reality of our world now. And I think we probably need to have some rules in place where they say, right, the only conversation that Victor Radley should have to think about, the only thing he should have to think about is whether he ever gets to represent Australia, not New South Wales or Queensland.
Yes.
That's my personal opinion. Is it a trial for Australia anymore? Or is it the biggest money spinning TV thing that the game has? And if it's the biggest money spinning TV thing the game has, we need the best players playing. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not sure Victor Radley's first choice back rower, but he was definitely in the mix. And anybody who disrespects him from that point of view has got that wrong, because he was in camp with the Blues this year, despite, I think he'd been injured for most of the year or something. So
he's been injured or suspended for most years in Origin selection. And a lot of those years leading up to Origin, I had him in my New South Wales 17. Very handy back rower, can also utility play, 14 if he had to jump in a 9. And the reality is Victor Radley, every time he plays rugby league, plays with his heart on his sleeve, and he's someone that's absolutely built for representative football. And I think if he's going to bring that sort of passion to an English jersey come the World Cup, he's going to be an asset, and he's going to be something that the Kangaroos miss out on. I believe that. Look at what a great little discussion we all just had around there. That was. I
think there's one other point to bring in here, and you mentioned Tonga, and I think it'd be very hard to say over the last 3 or 4 years that there hasn't been a more passionate band of supporters than the Tongan fans. The atmosphere that they've created at games, the numbers they turn out in, whether their team win or lose. I don't see any of those Tongan fans saying we won't support the team if it's only full of players of heritage. I think the players have to buy into that culture and be seen to buy into it. And you can tell from all of the heritage that they do before a game and after a game, how much it genuinely does mean to them. If that's good enough for the fans, who are we to say that they shouldn't be allowed to play on that basis?
It's 2022, and at the end of the day, there's the multiculturalism that's throughout the world at the moment, and the different bloodlines and the lineages that everyone has. You can be sort of mid-20s or later, and find out that you have a certain lineage in your blood, and that you could absolutely feel connected to that.
Sorry, Taylor.
I know with my circumstance, I didn't find out. I didn't know at all because my great grandmother was completely adopted, had no background in her at all. I found out that she was Indigenous. Now I didn't find that out till I was in about year 10 or 11 at school. My mother didn't find that out till she was about 45 years old.
Taylor was happy, and there was a few more rep teams he could try and get into because he wasn't getting any rep teams in year 10 or 11.
Yeah, no one wanted me in year 11, trust me. But what I'm saying is the amount of players now that find out about their heritage later on or something like that, it's hard to just say, listen, Victor, you're 22 years old, pick and stick now. That's crazy. Why can't he represent his heritage later on? He could find out in 3-4 years that he's got some Scottish bloodlines. And who am I to tell him that that's not a part of his heart that he's found and a part of his heritage that he's now connected with? And why can't he represent them?
I've got two stories to sort of throw in there, and it might ignite another discussion, or you might want to change subjects, Taylor. It's up to you. But USA, I was involved with the USA Tomahawks in 2011 to 2013. We were majority heritage players. I was involved with Ireland in 2008 World Cup. There was majority heritage players. Both teams made the respective quarterfinals of their World Cup. Both teams were the story of that World Cup. Some of the excitement around both Ireland, but definitely the USA in 2013. There was a little crowd that built up that were following America all around. Anybody who wasn't sure where to pin their mast in 2013 went with the Americans because they loved the story. It was great to see the USA in the quarterfinals. I know I'm biased because I was involved, but it was great to see. What that also did, I think, was inspire some people with American blood, be that from birth or from heritage, to think one day I want to be there. After that, there was a political fight. It probably wasn't really a fight, actually, because one team, my side of it, the AMNRO, just sort of walked away and let somebody else take over. They've had a policy of reducing heritage players mostly, and they did that very quickly. And at the 2017 World Cup, to say they got their backside handed to them would be a nice way of putting it. And nobody really remembered how well America went at that World Cup, and nobody talked about that around the game. For this next World Cup qualifiers, they did sort of go back a little bit on the heritage and allow a couple more to creep in. Unfortunately, they didn't make it. So I would say from a heritage point of view for a lot of emerging nations, from an emerging nations point of view, from a developing point, heritage is really important so that you can stick to a certain standard of football. I'm not saying that you all get to a quarter final in a World Cup, but you want to be competitive and move up. And I think any nation that's coming into the game as a developing nation should have a policy, or again, that should be dictated to by the game, by the International Federation, the European Federation, whatever else, policy where you've got if you like, a sliding scale of the amount of heritage players you're allowed to play based on how long you've been at that level, so that your target is to produce homegrown. The next story I want to share is from a time as Poland coach. Now, I'd love to put this to all three of you and decide who you think these guys should play for. We've got a lot of stick. There's a lot of heritage players playing for Poland, so you got the stick. You only won because you had these Aussies that had Polish blood, whatever. Some of these guys had grandparents that were born in a place on the map that at one point was in Poland, and then during the war, or just because they did some kind of deal over a table, the border was moved, and it was all of a sudden outside of Poland and in another country. What country can they represent? So imagine you're born in Revesby, where you were, Taylor, right? And then due to a war or something, Anastasia Palaszczuk moved the Queensland border when you were 4, and all of a sudden Revesby was in Queensland, and you were told you couldn't play for New South Wales.
They wouldn't have me in Maroon camp because I bleed blue anyway. They wouldn't dare pick me for the Maroons. But you're absolutely right, because I'd still want to play for New South Wales. That's where I was born. That's where I feel connected to, and that's what I'd see myself as. I see myself as a blue, as a New South Welshman.
I'd love Tim and Phil's thoughts on those two arguments, like the American and the Polish story. Like where your sort of thoughts go with that in terms of, I suppose, heritage as a development tool, and then also heritage when it's a bit more. Well, it's not cut and dried, is it? If your grandparents were born in a place that's called Poland at one point, and then there was another one whose grandparents were born in a concentration camp. And they'd moved them from outside of Poland to somewhere else. And for anybody to pass comment on any of that, so no, they should be playing is.
Yeah, I agree totally. Like whatever nation they did they adhere to, sort of thing. Like, if just because that border had moved, they felt that they were Polish. That's the nation that they identified more as, and that's where I see that, where they actually believe where they should be, and that sort of like the nation that they identify as.
At one point, Tim, I think it went to appeal. Rugby League ruled meant that player could not play for Poland.
See, I find that ridiculous. I really do, because they identified as Polish, and yet who's the governing body to say that they're not Polish?
And I think what we're saying is heritage isn't cut and dried, is it, Phil? Like, it's.
I mean, to add to the stories that you've told, one of the great stories of the 2000 World Cup was Lebanon playing. And one of the great post-match interviews was by Hazim El Masri in the bowels of Millennium Stadium in Wales, when a journalist said to him, "What's the point of this Lebanon team? You're all a bunch of heritage players from Australia. How can you call yourself Lebanese?" A journalist.
Oh,
I can't remember who it was. I do believe he may have been from the Antipodes, though.
Yeah.
And Hazim El Masri gave the most amazing answer, which struck with me then and still resonates about all this discussion. And he said, I was born in Lebanon. You know, my family comes from direct descendants from Lebanon. Do you think we were going to wait around in a war for rugby league to be invented? Of course we went to Australia to better ourselves. It doesn't make me any less Lebanese. So I think you've got to put that into the equation. The buzz around this World Cup coming up is Jamaica in the men's game and Brazil in the women's game, and the opportunities that this World Cup has to spread the footprint. And I think Jamaica is a great cultural story. Clearly, there's a lot of links to the Windrush generation over here. And, you know, if we can appeal to people who aren't normally followers of rugby league to come and, you know, bring all of their cultural heritage to a game. There was a match that Jamaica played against the England Knights at the end of 2019 as part of their build-up to the World Cup. Totally different sights and sounds at the ground to what we're used to. And it was fantastic. You know, people were sambering on the terraces, and that's exactly what we want. The whole thing about nobody really knows what the Brazil women are going to bring to the game. It's a new continent. You know, what do we want from the sport? If we want to expand the footprint, then let's play to this. And I think the other thing that underlines this eligibility issue is that you have to be an affiliate nation to play in a World Cup qualifier. Observer is not enough. To be an affiliate nation, you have to have a domestic competition. You have to have a certain amount of teams playing in the country that is represented. Now, all there needs to be is a quota system, which does already exist. It might need modifying or tweaking a little bit, saying that when you get to choosing the 25-player squad for your World Cup, you have to have 6 players from the domestic competition, and maybe you have to have a minimum of 1 player in the match day 17 likely to be on the bench. But that way you get the best of heritage and the best of developing the sport back in the nation. So if let's say Poland, let's hope, maybe are involved in qualifying for the 2029 World Cup, you've got some players like Mikolecki, who's at Leeds, born in Gdansk. You've got some players who are playing in the NRL, either at the senior grades or the junior grades that want to affiliate. But you've also got 7 or 8 teams playing in Poland, and you're going to pick 5 Lodge Magpies players. You've got that balance right. Why should we be apologising for that? That's the way forward.
And I think as well, from a practical point of view, Taylor, and you'd know this, and Tim, you'd know this, when you're introducing somebody who's a bit fresh to rugby league in terms of they're not played as much, Tim might be a good person to start with this one, Taylor, because the level he's coaching at right now. If you've got an inexperienced kid coming to your team, Tim, do you think that kid gets most of their learning off you as the coach, or do you think they get most of their learning from the players around them all the time?
The players around them.
That's right. So if you apply that theory to heritage versus, it shouldn't be versus, but heritage versus birthright, the heritage players are going to help those native domestic players accelerate in the sport so much quicker than if 20 natives who've played 6 domestic games a season, because that's all they can manage and the comp isn't very intense, they're going to do so much better and develop so much more than if they throw them to the wolves as a purely domestic. And you've just got to, like I say, it's just like a quote, like you said, Phil, a quota system. And I guess you and I both agree in that sense that quota system, let's say we're going to start a new nation now. Let's say we're going to create a new nation, or we're going to find a nation and put forward a committee. God help us. I would argue that we should go heritage to try and get qualified and play our first World Cup, right? And then, because we're doing that, that in theory gives people a dream in that country. You know, let's say it's Timbuktu, right? But then once we get to a certain level, the powers that be, the federation should say, right, once you reach a certain level, I don't know exactly what that criteria is, but the next time you play Test Match Rugby League, there needs to be X amount of domestics in there, right? And then in 10 years' time, you need to have 50-50. And then in 15 years' time, you need to have 75-25. Or maybe not, because are you less from Timbuktu if you're only heritage? That's my other point too. So maybe it's just 50-50 that we need.
I don't believe that. I think 50-50 is too much. I don't think any governing body can tell someone how much how much blood or how far removed they are from a certain heritage. I don't believe that anyone's got that right to tell them how connected they are to that.
I agree. Yeah.
I don't believe it. I mean, sure, I think there are great implications for the domestic competition, and there should be rules around that. Having a certain amount of domestic players in there, but the rule should not be that you can't have heritage players. It should be that you have to have domestic players.
Here's an interesting one.
Well, here's another one to throw in to the three of you that are based over there. Would you deem that Melbourne Storm have been a success? Rhetorical question. Clearly they have. Melbourne Storm decided from the start that they would put a winning team together, not that players from Melbourne would be eligible to play for the Storm. They picked the best Queensland talent, and they had a development program for Melbournians. And the fans went and watched it. They bought into this criteria of, we've got a team that can be competitive, and actually we've suddenly got a team that can win things. And that was 1998. The first player who graduated through any scheme who was from Melbourne must have been about 2004, 2005.
I think it was even later, wasn't it? It was young Tonamapia, wasn't it, Lee? I think it was like 2012.
I think it was the first. Young Tonamapia was in the last decade, sure.
Yeah, he was.
The first or not sure. That's my conjecture.
But the point is that you set up something that is successful, draws kids in, is the apex of the triangle, not the base of it. And you do it on the basis of excellence. And you do that necessarily in international rugby by starting with heritage players. If by then those heritage players get overtaken by domestic players because you've done such a good job in enticing the youth to come and play for their nation, that's great. Just increase the talent pool. Go back to the conversation we were having earlier on. The issue we've got here more than any other is that we've not got enough people playing the game. Doesn't matter whether they're heritage, indigenous or otherwise. The attraction is not there for boys or girls to choose rugby league first up. If international competition is going to help shed the spotlight on that, put the best players out there as often as you can, wearing those colours, relate to them, see them do well in international competitions of repute, which ideally is a World Cup in any sport, and take it from there. Don't limit yourselves. Just have a quota for domestic players, which is realistic in a 25-person squad, which I think is around about probably the 6 mark. And then you get the best of both worlds. But then don't change that.
Why can't you have 25 players that are, your heritage players, but then you can have another 5 players that are sort of development sort of players that are from that domestic competition. And even if they just come along and train and learn, who cares?
I think if you speak to Michael Checker at the moment, and we were fortunate enough to do an interview with him a month or so ago, of course he wants to qualify for the quarterfinals of the World Cup because that guarantees that Lebanon have another shot in 2025, and he's going to put together as many players as he can to achieve that goal. But he's absolutely committed to having 5 guys over from Lebanon, which is the most troubled part of the world at the moment anyway. So to even think about getting 5 kids from that competition or young men over to Australia to train with the elite, because he wants to leave a legacy back in Lebanon so that when they do qualify for 2029 or 2033 or whenever we decide we're going to have our schedule of World Cups, he does have a greater pool of talent to pick from that is based in Lebanon. Surely that's the way to do it.
Yeah, I agree. There absolutely has to be domestic players involved. It's great to hear that he's so committed to getting those players over here amid, a big crises that are currently happening in Lebanon. But I'm interested to hear, Tim, hearing some of these arguments that have been thrown at you. Are you still set in the ways that once you pick for, Origin, that you should be stuck to Australia?
Yes and no. State of Origin now is far more prolific than the international game, and that's got to change. Like reading all of the information on, go through the socials and that, and Kenty, Paul Kent saying that the Queenslanders, the jersey means more to them than the New South Welshman. And I'm thinking, well, no, it doesn't. But that's the way that it's sort of come into. It's a lot harder. They reckon it's harder than playing an international game and everything like that. And I'm thinking, well, what if we got the international game back up to where it should be, which is right at the very top?
Is it harder or is it just more hyped?
probably more hyped. Like
Because
some of the games that I've seen against like New Zealand versus Tonga, when Tonga beat both New Zealand and Australia, they belted us out of the park. And now every one of those guys who played in the Australian team were playing State of Origin. You'd think that those sort of guys would be capable of taking that pounding, but because of what State of Origin means to them, but it doesn't seem to be.
Well, the other thing, Phil, that I want to ask you. Sorry, Taylor, I'm asking the questions again.
Yeah, you're right.
Is Victor Radley a shoe-in to actually get picked in the best 17?
Probably the wrong time to ask the question. Ask me at the end of what is a ridiculously long Super League season as to who's left standing. You'd have to say if he was playing at loose forward, you'd probably pick Morgan Knowles of St Helens at the moment, who is arguably one of the best players we've got over here in any position.
Let me just stop you right there, Phil. I just have to translate for you to the Aussies. Loose forward is a lock.
I know that.
No, I think you'll find that the game was invented over here and loose forward is loose forward.
That's my boy. That's my boy.
5/8 does not exist. It's a fallacious concept.
Talk about loose forwards. We've got a couple of loose tongues over in England there. If you're having a bit of a chin wag.
The fella at St Helens, you reckon's the shoe-in?
Morgan, yeah, at the moment. But of course you'd accept Victor Radley. And he's versatile enough that he can play in the second row or even auxiliary hooker if you needed him to. So it's about getting the best squad you can to go into a tournament. So, yeah, whether he'd start against Samoa or not, I think he'd be in the 17. He might not start. It just struck me while you were talking, going back to who was the first Melbourneian to play for Storm. Of course, he's over here now. It's Mahe Fanua.
Ah, yes.
What year was he?
The flying mullet.
Yep.
Yeah. So he was, but again, he wasn't. It took 6-7 years for him to, be excited by seeing these guys running around in his city in a sport that he was unfamiliar with to become good enough to play for them. So, I use that as an example purely because I think that is development. And that's at a club level. You do the same at international level. But no, I think all of this debate we're having again goes back to there's almost an insecurity about Australian Rugby League in some respects from seeing it over here. In the one breath, you're telling us you could pick 4 teams of equal strength, which you can clearly, and on the other hand, you're saying you want to keep all the best players, whether they're Australian or not. I mean, actually, you don't need to decide what priority you give to international rugby league. Allow players. What's the statistic? About 45% of the players in the NRL are of Pacific heritage, but that's only about 2% of the population. So clearly, the Pacific Islanders of heritage are massively attracted to our sport. They'd be even more attracted if they knew that there was an international route where they could represent their heritage without being not necessarily forced, but being told that the only nation they should really be thinking about playing for is Australia. Just relinquish them. Let's come up with some test matches in the Pacific Islands that have meaning outside of, just state of origin and or Australia playing a President's 13.
Totally agree, mate.
And get a proper international calendar and give them the respect that they deserve. And if Australia can't pick 25 players to come over and play for the World Cup from players who are eligible solely for Australia, then stop telling us you've got 40 players that are better than we've got.
Yeah, absolutely.
I want to drill down on that point that Phil just made about there being 4 teams that. I think part of this is that the talent pool in Australia is also a common source of conjecture. Now, there's some people who say you shouldn't have extra NRL teams. There's not enough talent to go around. There's teams at the bottom of the Super League ladder. I think there's about 5 of them deserve to be wooden spooners at the minute. They sort of tend to be outdoing each other bad. So they could argue that the standards have dropped a little bit at the bottom end here and there's less players running around. But I think that's because of the poor recruitment and not the poor recruitment, the poor resources poured into recruitment in terms of they're not getting the best players from every part of Australia and whatnot. So there's that thought that the talent pools, for whatever reason, isn't strong. Secondly, the last time Australia played a test match, what happened, Phil? What happened, Tim? What happened, Taylor?
We got flogged.
You got beat by Tonga. Now, Tonga aren't going to get weaker, are they?
No. They're going to get stronger. More players are going to want to play for Tonga because of that.
Yeah. And you know who's coming next? Samoa.
Well, they said on the socials and all that sort of stuff, they reckon that Samoa will be a tier 1 nation before Tonga.
Yeah, okay.
What I think is exciting, though, is PNG, because not only do we have obviously the only nation in the world where rugby league is the national sport, but by putting the Hunters into the Q Cup, you're now starting to get even more quality to choose from. I think that's club rugby league has to ally with international rugby league. You'd hope that the Silktails will have a similar effect in who Fiji might be picking in years to come. I know there's because it's rugby league, there has to be an administrative dispute between the Silktails and Fiji Rugby League, but hopefully that gets resolved. We should be looking at the same over in the Northern Hemisphere. Is there a composite Ireland and or Scotland team that can be put into a professional, semi-professional environment that will increase the chances of those nations being stronger at international level? We haven't yet seen the benefit, and we may not, of Toulouse being in Super League along with Catalan, but what we have seen is a slightly more competitive French team, because they've got more players of standard to choose from. I think you've got to look at the domestic game as well as the internationals and make both of them interlock into each other. If you are going to take round 1 or round 0 of a match to America, what does that mean in terms of developing the game in America domestically? Don't just take a game there and leave it. We did that in 1987. What we need to do is decide what do we want out of international rugby league, and how can we get as many people playing in it through their domestic qualification as possible. And I think the Hunters have been a classic example of that, watching them play Fiji the other week.
Now, you know as well, the Australian game has a bit of apathy towards it. If they were to really embrace this whole thing of international rugby league, they would make so much money holding an Australian World Cup if Tonga and Samoa played in the right place. So like a place where, and they do this quite well now, they have played games
Campbelltown
or near Brisbane at the Gold Coast. They could fill Suncorp Stadium. Samoa versus Tonga will fill Suncorp Stadium. And you throw in your PNGs and your Fijis and whatnot, and you do it properly, and you structure it properly. They would make a mozza at the World Cup over here, and I'm pretty convinced that the game would love a bit more money that's not just TV money as well. So, that's the irony of it. And the thing about Papua New Guinea, Phil, too, what happened the last time they played an international?
They won.
Against Great Britain.
That's right.
Is that not the first time it's ever happened to, Phil?
Yeah, I think the Orchids as well beat the England women's team that were on tour in a test match. It was massive for the sport over there and for the role of women in a nation like PNG. So I do think that international banner is really important. But if you're talking about money and generating more money for the NRL, which is clearly going to be the driver for however international rugby league looks, let's say in 5 years' time, the middle state of origin game was being played in London, because you've got a commodity there that is almost at saturation point in Australia. So you take it to Perth, you sell it out. You take it to Adelaide, you sell it out. Take it to, well, probably not Darwin because you haven't got a stadium big enough. But what do you use to spread the footprint of rugby league and actually then engage people in telling them if they enjoy this product, there's more of it round the corner? You start with a 5-year plan of saying, where do we want to put that second origin game? And London is an obvious place to build up to put it. If you put it there at the moment, you get a lot of expats there and people like me that would drive 1,000 miles to go and watch it. But you probably wouldn't fill Wembley Stadium. But if you say it's going to happen in 5 years' time and we're going to build up to it, and you're going to see the players that you saw playing the World Cup, and you're going to see these players playing another World Cup 2 years down the line, you've got a hugely saleable domestic commodity there. I think you look at the same with the World Club Challenge, which we've never properly aligned or done as best it could be. It's been an after. That is something that you could take all around the world if you build it up slowly. So you can imagine part of your plan would be to take it to a Middle East nation that has money. And again, there's ethical issues clearly about the Soccer World Cup going to Qatar, but there's money in places like Abu Dhabi that is ethically acceptable, I think, where you could say, well, that's only flying half the world for both of the teams. There's a sporting public there that would buy into a major international event. If you're just serious about what you're going to do in America, let's book Los Angeles for 8 years' time or whatever it might be. Look at the club game and the benefits financially that could have linked into an international concept. And it is all about eligibility, because I think the more you put international front and centre, the more you can actually do with the domestic game.
Didn't they recently announce that they're going to have a game in America, or they were talking about putting a State of Origin game in America?
Yeah, they were talking about it, but yeah, I reckon that's a good idea to actually like plan ahead and actually try and develop more of the national sort of side of things.
I think one thing that has emerged to me since UVL has been at the top of the Australian game is that they're pretty good at leaking things to the media in advance to test the waters of what people think. And I think that the American idea was possibly one of them, and it sort of got a bit quiet, went a bit quiet, didn't it? And then it'll pop up again. Because the other one that popped up was the conferences, the old conference system, and everybody shut it down. So.
Yeah, everybody shut it down. That's right, except for Phil Gould. Phil Gould wanted it. Old Gus.
Yeah.
He was keen on the conference system. I wouldn't mind having a look closely at how it would work too. I think there'd definitely be benefits for it. That's for sure. I mean, Phil, you'd see the benefits of that system over there all the time.
I think the thing about a conference system is it depends on the quality of the teams. We're going through another introspective nasal gazing exercise. We know all the questions. We actually know all the answers. We are so geographically restricted that growth is limited, but growth is essential. And I think it comes back down to, do you see yourselves as a big minority sport, or can you see a day where you'll be a small major sport? Now, to do that, you need to have more of a spread. To have more of a spread, you need everybody to spend up to the salary cap. To do that, you probably do need 2 conferences. You need a minimum of 8 teams in each conference. We haven't got 16 teams at the moment, but that, the model that we want to aspire to, the standards-driven model, is almost, if you like, a franchise type system, is something that we should be looking at. Something that we scratched the surface of, but didn't do very well a few years ago. But it's almost about your identity and being self-confident and proud in what you've got. And again, going back to participation, which is something I'm really passionate about, and which sort of underpins all of this debate about eligibility. We know all of the good players who are 15 or 16 years old playing throughout the north of England. There isn't a scout who's worth their money that doesn't know where those players are, but there's less of them. There are 14 and 15 and 16-year-olds playing in parts of the United Kingdom who A, don't even know of rugby league, and B, even if they play at a social or community level, don't know how good they can be because they don't get the opportunity. So we need to look at all of that, whether it be centres of excellence, whether we invest in development officers as opposed to signing a lot of overseas players who are just slightly better than the players that we've got at the moment. All of that is up for grabs, and hopefully the right decisions are going to be made. Conference would work over here, but it would have to be a complete change of mindset.
I'm really sorry, guys. I'm got to go. I've got to say goodnight to the kids. Thank you very much.
He's come on here. He's had his dinner. He's been drinking. Now he wants to go to bed.
I'm drinking Pepsi, mate.
Nice, Tim. Thanks for joining us, mate. Much appreciated.
No worries, guys. Take care.
Same time, same place next week.
No worries, he's been drinking.
See you later.
See you, lad. Bye.
Yeah, so Phil, you've mentioned several times about the participation game at a grassroots sort of level over there in England, and it's struggling. I guess, Lee, you've seen both. You probably have more of an idea of what's happening in England and what's happening over here. Obviously, we have the NRL and that over here. Are there any things that you think England should adopt from Australia and the way that they expand their grassroots levels over here and try to push it over through the north, or is it just too different in terms of the size of the game?
The size of the game in terms of participation, mate, is very different. And I think the Australian system is creaking at the minute. By the Australian system, I'm talking about a pathway to the Australian Kangaroos. It's creaking at the minute for everything that we've spoken about for the last hour or so. But I think it always stabilises and has been stabilised for many years by the amount of people who play the game. Once that starts to dip, the more it dips, the more you take away from the participation base, the less quality rises to the top. That's only natural. In England, because we don't have that many players playing the game, the pyramid of success, the pyramid of development means that there's only a few players that are of a certain standard at the top. What I think the approach needs to be in England is very much akin to what we did in the David Waite era, Phil, with the regions and the nationals and whatnot. Ultimately, when you look at that plan. It was about putting the best against the best as regularly as possible from age 13, 14, 15. The big difference, Taylor, is they don't play as many intense games. So if you're a red-hot player in the Super League, I remember when I was in Wigan and Andy Farrell was captain and he was the go-to man. He was he just did everything for Wigan, basically. And you just knew that when they were playing Wakefield or Castleton at JJB Stadium, as it was called now, you just knew that Andy Farrell would score 2 or 3 tries or carve up, basically. You just knew. And that means that so many other players who maybe aren't as committed, because there are some, you know that, being a player, in a squad of 25, some are overly committed, some are
the opposite end of the scale.
They barely the end of the scale.
Yeah.
And they would just go, maybe take a few choices that aren't that great before they play Wakefield or Castleton at home on that Sunday afternoon. And they'd get away with it because they'd win and they'd play okay and whatnot. Well, for many years, you've not been able to do that in Australian Rugby League. You've got to turn up every week. But not just in the senior level. You've got to do that when you're a junior. You've got to do that when you're a junior growing up in Penrith. You've got to do that when you're a junior growing up in Logan or whatever, or you used to anyway. And that's slowly deteriorating in some parts now. So when you ask me about comparing the systems, they're very, very, very different. And all we have to do in England, I believe, that will fast-track development is get the best playing the best from a younger age as often as possible. And don't know if it has to cost millions and millions of pounds like it did back then as well.
Millions of pounds? Are you talking about weight, or what sort of phony money have you blokes playing with over there? Anyway, sorry, Phil.
I was going to say there's a couple of things. One is the profile of the sport here at the moment isn't that high. And until it is, you're not going to attract people to even know what the sport is. The second thing is that on the east coast of Australia, most of the athletes will naturally put themselves to rugby league as a first choice, whereas here, everybody's first choice is soccer. Their second choice might be cricket or athletics. I can't mention that other sport. Union's not a big deal, as big a deal over here, because clearly they're not aligned anymore. One is in the winter and one is in the summer. So if you've got any sense, you'd actually encourage kids to play both and just see which they enjoyed more. But what we don't have is enough choice of first-class athletes making rugby league their priority, even in the north of England, where it historically has been its strongest. I think, you raise the profile. Well, you do that through having more competitive games and a really good home World Cup. And then secondly, you actually go to areas where the game is not currently strong and mine them, rather than just put all your resource into the areas that have traditionally been strong that are actually receding a little bit for a whole number of reasons. The demographic of the area has changed massively, and that's not going to reverse. The big towns and cities and even some of the villages of the north of England where rugby league was a first choice sport, it was northern industrial and working class. Well, industrial and working class don't really bear definition anymore. The world has changed. So I think, again, we have to change. We can't assume that, there's the old phrase that we have here, that if you're in a mining area, you whistle down the pit and you get 2 prop forwards for Sunday's game. A, we don't have any mines anymore. B, there are no big kids playing, so you don't get any prop forwards. So, we have to change and adapt. And I'm not sure we've done that quickly enough yet. Whereas the one thing you do have over there is that a lot of the best kids will choose rugby league as their first option.
Absolutely. Phil, mate, you've been a revelation to come on this week. I've enjoyed everything you've had to say. It's been great to chat to you and have that, I guess, that scope from someone, especially with the Radley story, someone on that side of the fence. It's been perfect. But I have to ask you, your background's made me hungry. Every time I look at the background, I'm thinking 4 or 20 pies, Lee. I keep looking at the wall and I'm thinking about 4 and 20 pies. I'm thinking, oh, geez, I might duck down the road and grab one. Talk us through the background. 40-20. What's this?
It's our monthly rugby league magazine that we started in 2011, believe it or not. They said it would last 6 issues. We're still doing it. It's long-form journalism. We were absolutely passionate not only about the written word, but preserving it in some format. So it's a niche within a niche. But every month we stick it out there, and hopefully, as Lee might testify, we try and cover the whole of the rugby league world.
Yeah.
If there's a kid playing in Africa and they've got a story to tell, that's as interesting to us as West Horton Lions in and around the Wigan area. So we're a monthly magazine available on digital if you want to read it in Australia, but hopefully just trying to preserve the kind of chat we've had today in a written format.
Yeah, do you get many subscribers over here, Phil? Sorry, Taylor.
You're right.
There's quite a few that take the digital version, yeah.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah, very good. As a kid, I remember saving my pocket money to buy Big League at Coles or Woolies with mum and dad. So it's and they are missing from the shelves these days. So it's good that it's being preserved, mate. And I might have a little look and throw a subscribe button by it. That sounds good.
It's a good magazine. I read it sometimes.
When you're on the toilet.
Probably where most of my writing needs to be read, I'm sure.
Phil, mate, you'll have to pump out some more episodes. Your monthly issue wouldn't last Lee a day.
Well, we do a podcast as well at least once a week. So when he's back in there, he's got an alternative.
Phil, you can join us same time every week. So if the link that you've got is repeatable as well. It'll just so you can just click on that link whenever you want. So whenever you're not doing anything, which your missus said it was most of the week.
Yeah, that's why she lets me go upstairs most days.
Yeah.
Now, whenever you think it's relevant, let me know. But I wouldn't crash you every week because they'd be turning off in droves.
You're welcome anytime, lad.
Absolutely, Phil. That's the benefit of having our own podcast. We tell everyone who's coming on, not the other way around.
Well, good to see you both, and we will catch up again for sure.
Take care.
Thanks very much, Phil. Appreciate it. All right, Lee, we might just wrap it up there, mate.
Sounds good, mate. Been a good one.
It has been a cracker. What are you doing this week? What's rugby league coach doing this week?
Not very much because it keeps raining every time I'm trying to coach.
It's like being back home.
I know. Mate, I'm going to have a big announcement probably next week.
Yeah, okay.
New venues for clinics and something else.
Okay, something else.
I did send a load of free programs out to a load of people, so I'm doing a webinar on Monday. The big thing I want to talk about, though, in summary, mate, we came from the same club as a fella, Steve Collier, Polish prop, passed away this week, unexpectedly, age 36. He's definitely not taking his own life. So, if anybody who knows him says he's not done that. And the people are looking into it now, the authorities looking at why he's died, but he has real sad news. So if I can, I'd like to dedicate this episode to him.
Absolutely, mate. It's a tragic story there, and he was a man that touched many people. Thoughts are with his family, that's for sure, his young kids.
That kills me.
Yeah, absolutely. So,
yeah.
All right, well, we'll wrap it up there, fellas. Thank you very much. Hopefully, we see you more often than not, Phil. I much appreciated your stories and your chiming in and your knowledge, mate. It's evident from start to finish. So, thank you very much. Thank you, Lee.
Pleasure was mine.
Thank you, everyone, for joining in, and we'll see you next week.